Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
You probably know much of this narrative quite well. The Israelites get the heck out of there. They leave Egypt. Pharaoh's chasing them down. They're standing at the sea splits. They cross. The Egyptians don't quite make it, and they are on the other side. And all that they have to do from here is absolutely everything else to journey across the desert and become a people. So we are going to pick things up in chapter 16 of Shemot, which I'm sharing on my screen, and I want to see all of your faces, but I need to shrink you down a little bit so I can actually see these verses. Okay, very good. So we're gonna get right into the fetching. Right, here was the happy part. They made it across, and the women dancing with their timbrels. That was for Rabbi Schatz.
Followed Miriam as they sing her song.
And we're going to pick things up in chapter 16. So commence fetching. They start walking. They start complaining. The evocative complaint, if only we had died by the hands of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out of this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. We're going to be looking at verses that are at the end of this chapter, so I'm not going to take us through all of the back and forth in too much detail, but I'll linger on that phrase for just a moment because they're talking about meat and they're talking about bread, and what ensues is God and Moses kind of trying to respond to each of those requests. So God tells them, I will rain down bread from the sky to test them to see what happens. They should gather double on the sixth day. And so Moshe and Aaron relay this to the Israelites. He has heard your fetching, and God is going to be giving you what you need, right? And an interesting little passive aggressive move here from Moses. Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord. Bring it up with management. This wasn't for us. That's where the complaint is, but God will answer your cry. So Aaron is this interesting verse. Aaron speaks to the community. They turn to the wilderness and they see the presence of God. They see Kavod Adonai. And now here God responds, you're going to eat, right? You're going to eat meat in the evening. You're going to eat bread in the morning. And through that, you will know who I am. You will know that I am God. And sure enough, in the evening, there's quail, a delicious quail dinner available for anyone and everyone. And in the morning, there is dew, and the dew then becomes a fine and flaky substance that we all know as manna, which is what Moses explains to them in the next verse. And he sort of gives them the instructions for how they should handle it. They should gather up lots of it, but not too much, right? As much as you require. Right, and that's an interesting phrase as well. Take what you need, but no more. Right, in omer a person. Right, so like a bit, not a ton, but a bit. So then what? Think toilet paper hoarding. Right, the Israelites did exactly what you would expect them to do. Right, some of them did that. Some of them took a lot, and some of them took a little. Right, not everyone needs to buy 1,000 rolls of toilet paper for, things to get a little crazy. But when they measured it by the Omer, it actually turns out everybody still had what they need. Right? It would be like if everyone wound up with a 6-pack of toilet paper. I don't know how far I can extend the manna toilet paper analogy. That's probably as far as I can go. We'll leave it there.
Correct.
Moses said, make sure you don't have any left until the morning. They didn't listen. This very evocative image, if they had any left, it became infested with maggots. Moses was angry. But sure enough, right, heading into Shabbat, they did what was said, 2 omers each. Moses reminds them, yes, that's what you're supposed to do. And again, right, just sort of proceeding apace that Moses says you should eat it today. Right, when you gather up your double portion, half of it is for Friday, half of it is for Saturday. And sure enough, when they go out to gather on the 7th day, there's nothing, right? Just as God said there would not be. God's not so happy, complains to Moshe about it, and says, this is what Shabbat's about, right? Shabbat means you're going to do what you need the day before, and you stay put, right? You don't go out on Shabbat. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to worry about those types of things. And we are told that they listened, at least at this point, right? And then here we get the name. The house of Israel named it manna. It was like coriander seed white, and it tasted like wafers in honey, which frankly that sounds delicious. I'm sure it would get old after a little while, but sounds tasty to me. Okay. Toilet paper analogies and food preferences notwithstanding, we are now actually going to get into the verses that we're going to be studying.
I also didn't understand what it means. It was like coriander seed. Like, is that how small it was?
Yeah, I think that's like describing the physicality of it, right? You're describing like what it is.
Eating plain coriander seed actually sounds terrible,
especially mixed with wafers and honey. Yeah, that sounds gross, right? Like you don't see like appetizers in fancy restaurants like a wafer with some honey and like coriander sprinkled over the top. That is
correct. Very good. Yeah.
Unless someone wants to give that a shot at a restaurant.
But it is interesting.
It could be blended together and made into a ktsitsa or something.
Renee, will you give that a shot for Shabbat one week and drop some off for us?
Absolutely.
Wafers, honey, and coriander. Let us know.
Absolutely, I will do that.
You do not have to do that. It is interesting that it doesn't say shaped like or the size. And these are not our verses, but I just am noticing this now that it says that it was like coriander seed. It doesn't really. That doesn't tell us what that means.
But for me, the white there indicates the appearance. Right, like Kizera Gad Lavan. Right?
Totally, and coriander seed isn't white.
Exactly. So it's like specifying what it looks like, and then okay,
go ahead. Sorry.
Great. Now the verses we're actually looking at after that wonderful tour through chapter 16. We're looking at verses 32, 33, 34 in chapter 16. I am very excited about these verses. We're going back to the category of verses that make you go, huh? And we're gonna check these out a little bit.
That's what this should have been called. That's the
verses
class
that
should
make
have been
you.
called.
It's not too late. We can change that. We can change it up. I love that. Okay. Verses that make you go. I don't know how you transcribe, huh? But sure.
Okay.
Vayomer Moshe, Zeh hadavar asher tziva Adonai. Moses says, this is the thing that God has commanded. Melo haomer mimenu lemishmeret ledorotechem. Let one omer of it be kept as a mishmeret, right? Like fill up an omer's worth of this manna for a mishmeret, for a like a reminder through the generations. Lema'an yir'u et halechem, so that they may see the bread. Asher ha'echalti etchem bamidbar, that I fed you in the wilderness, in the desert. Behotzeti etchem eretz Mitzrayim, when I took you out of the land. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon, Moses said to Aaron, Kach tzintzenet, very excited about this word. Kach tzintzenet achat, take a single tzintzenet. I'm intentionally not translating that word. V'ten shama milo ha'omer man. And place within it, take that omer full's worth of manna, v'hanach oto lifnei Adonai lemishmeret ledorotechem, and place it before God as a mishmeret, as like a sign through the ages. Kasher tziva Adonai el Moshe, vaynichehu Aaron lifnei ha'edut lemishmeret, and just as God commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the edut, it's translated here as pact, lemishmeret, to be kept. I'll just give like a brief word about these verses before we turn it before I turn it back over to Rabbi Schatz for the Kushiot corner, just saying that neither Rabbi Schatz nor I had really noticed these verses in any great depth before, and there are a number of ways. I'll leave it at that. There are a number of ways in terms of what's happening with the manna and how it's being manipulated that do not fit with at least how I thought about what's happening with manna and in terms of what's going on at this point in the narrative. So I'll like leave it at that. I don't want to say too much for now, but I think there's a lot of stuff here that is interesting to pull apart and dive into.
Great. Can you just scroll up a tad so that we can also see the English of 34 if people want to see it? Oh, okay, great. And sorry if I seem a little bit distracted. I'm also trying to multitask our tech team getting set up for this thing that I'm doing right after this. So I'm with you, and my eyes are in multiple places. Okay, so Kushiot. Anybody have any questions? Any things you're noticing? Any words you potentially don't know that you would like to talk about? Yeah, Bonnie.
I want to know where the manna is. Where did it get lost?
Yeah, great. Great. And I think that's probably why Rabbi Shapiro and I didn't remember really focusing on this, because you kind of just jump over this part because of that exact question. Like, wait, what happened? How did we lose track all of a sudden? Yeah, Jay.
How big is an omer?
Great. Good. So there are different measurements of things in our Talmud, in our Mishnah, here in the Torah, that we obviously don't use in today's world in English or in Hebrew. And so an omer was a certain amount of something. So how much does it actually mean in our day? I actually have a book right over there that I can't usually say this because I'm not usually in my office, but I can go grab it and see if it tells us the answer to that kushia.
I just looked it up using Rabbi Google, because as I was reading those verses, it occurred to me, it's like, oh, that's actually a piece that I didn't look up. Rabbi Schatz can check the physical book. The answers that I saw said 2.3 liters, which is actually more than I thought it would be. I was picturing like kind of a little like jar of oil a la the Hanukkah story, but like not like a 2-liter bottle is like a substantial. Like a 2-liter bottle of Coke is a big bottle of Coke, so bigger than I thought it would be.
Thanks. Okay, Renee.
Also kind of related to what Jay was saying, but the tzintzit, the tzintzit by my terms is a jar, right? And we're talking biblical times. It seemed kind of odd to me that they would take a tzintzit and put it before God. That it's just a simple, like a simple regular run-of-the-mill jar, that if they're putting something before Hashem, that it should be something more nice and more special. Great.
Fantastic.
Renee, out of curiosity, how do you know that word?
Oh, wait, sorry, you're muted. I muted you on.
Tzintzit it's spoken Hebrew. I use it quite a bit.
Got it. So like it's a known word in Hebrew. It's very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Karen, you had your hand up.
So maybe I tuned out a little, but they're dying of hunger and starvation and blah, blah, blah. And now they're not supposed to eat everything. They're supposed to save it for another time. So there was one thing about that. Are they still getting enough to eat? And now they have to save some too? Okay. And also, I can't say, but it's like God saying, make sure they know how I took care of you. It's kind of, egocentric or something. It's make sure that you save this so that they will know. But I also understand it. Just remember, it's like Pesach. Pesach is remember what I did for you.
Yeah, great. And I think Elon was also nodding along with you. I think it's exactly that. It is egocentric. It is God saying, like, I did this huge thing for you. Make sure. What? Rabbi Shapiro doesn't think so.
Disagree, but that's okay.
Okay. That it is a way of them believing, and it's interesting. Like this, we are taking opposite stances now, Rabbi Shapiro, you and I from last week. that God is somehow needing to be the center of that moment, and in memory, but also in action.
There's no blood. There's no blood in mine, There's no.
But I'm not sure how you can interpret it any way but egocentric, right?
Correct.
Because God's what, and this happens frequently. God's saying, "Do this so you remember what I did for you." Now, egocentric does not necessarily imply bad. Correct. But it's clear there's no other reason for it. How could one interpret it other than being egocentric?
Rabbi Shapiro?
Well, this is getting off track from are we?
That's true. Okay, we can no, we can go to that after. You're right.
Should we put a pin in that, or do we want to dive into that?
No, put a pin in that. That was a kushia. We'll put a pin in it, and then you can answer first. Okay.
Question was Rabbi Shapiro. How can you think something so ridiculous in a name?
Well, you said that we didn't. Okay. Nancy.
I'm curious about this whole last part of it that Aaron placed it before I'm looking at the English, but before the pact, and what does that mean, and where is it, and that whole idea.
Yeah, great, fantastic. Other thoughts, questions? I'm only not commenting because that was part of what I also looked at, so I'm not going to give you the answer yet. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, Rabbi Shapiro, why don't you unpin your answer and we'll go from there. I'm also going to rename Susan because every time she re-enters, I think it's Rabbi Klickfeld. So anyway, go ahead.
Wait, can I say, I don't get to say the fun. If I go into this, can I then say the fun part about verse 33 afterwards?
Yeah, go. Yes.
Don't.
Go ahead. This is a podcast. People need to be.
Are we sure people listen to this?
Yes.
Really?
Continue. Yes. Can you?
Hi, everybody. Okay. So, I mean, to Elon, to your point about like egocentric, not necessarily as a bad thing. I guess I see it. They're in the relationship building stage, right? They're trying to figure out how to be in relationship with each other. This is a people that just got taken out of oppressive slavery that they had been in for centuries. They've just made it out, and they're already saying, well, what have you done for me lately? I mean, Karen, to your point about there's not enough to eat, so why are they keeping some for leftovers? My sense is it's actually the opposite, right? That the verses leading up to this are telling us about the inherently temporary nature of the manna and the quail, right? That it spoils after one day. And fascinatingly, we're scooping up a 2-liter bottle of it to keep for centuries, right? So to me, that's one of the things that's interesting about these verses is that something that goes, I don't know what goes bad most quickly in your refrigerator, but like think about whatever goes bad most quickly. And now we're being told, actually keep it forever. And it's going to last for years and years. I mean, we don't know where it went, right? But it's going to last for years and years and years. I think that's really interesting. And in terms of the egocentric piece, I like, sure. I mean, I think there's an edge like to that word that isn't necessarily totally positive. I guess I see it as God saying, this is going to be a sign, right? This is going to be a symbol of how I'm helping to care for you and sustain you, right? And I mean, we can still leave that adjective, but I guess I see it as a symbolic gesture of relationship building that will be kept always, rather than why does God need everything to be about him?
But what if I give money for a building, or if I give money for a scholarship fund, and I name it the Spar Building or the Spar Scholarship Fund? One can argue, and correctly so, that there is a motivation of ego there. Otherwise, I would have given it anonymously. Right. Having said that, there is still a positive outcome from it. So it is okay that God says, remember what I've done. I have no problem with God needing that gratification. It doesn't make me feel worse about God.
Interesting. incidentally, there's a great Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David gives a wing and has his name on it, and Ted Danson gives anonymously but tells everybody he's anonymous, and it's a fantastic Curb Your Enthusiasm episode. But that's neither here nor there. I'm curious to hear what others have to say.
Yeah, Karen and
more
then
than
Denise.
Curb Your Enthusiasm references.
Karen and then Denise and then Renee and then Neora. Woo.
It's like the ashes of a dead person.
It's like the what?
What?
The ashes of someone who's died.
Right. In other words, it doesn't have to be coriander that's still coriander and eating it. But it is something, when you said it goes like away, it's I don't know what, the next day, it's not still mana to eat. Okay.
I hadn't thought about that. That's such an interesting connection.
I mean, I have the ashes of 2 dogs in my house. And so whenever you pass by, it's not like they're the dogs, but you remember. And so it's kind of like that. So it doesn't matter about it lasting as it was really planned. We're not going to eat it, but it's a reminder. It's a, what do you call it, a mezuzah on the door when I walk into my...
That's really beautiful.
Brilliant.
I love that.
And
I love
you're
that.
welcome. You can use it anytime you want.
Well, I might in a few minutes. You'll hear. Okay, Denise.
So when Rabbi Shapiro said they've been slaves for like hundreds of years and oppression and stuff, I don't know, it was like this light bulb, because I thought like maybe they're not complaining like, yeah, whining, but more like just stressed out, because when you're a slave like that, it's awful and it's oppressive, but it's really predictable. And that when there's unpredictability and there's more options, that's great and it's free, but it could also be really stressful if you've never encountered that before. So maybe that's part of what they were experiencing.
Yes, I agree with completely, which is why, sorry, I keep jumping in, but.
Yeah, Renee. So
Rabbi Shapiro said something about the egocentric and it may not being so bad. I'm thinking that, we can look at egocentrism and selfishness and whatever as a bad thing, but from a perspective for the Jewish people, it's also an opportunity to learn what the repercussions are of that, positively and negatively. So I kind of see it as a learning thing for that the Jews got from Hashem. Juby agrees.
Right. Yeah. Shapiro, you have anything to say about that?
I mean, I have a lot. I'm accumulating. It's interesting. Fine. It's interesting to me that this is where the conversation is happening. This is not at all where I expected it to go, which is why this is always fun. But yeah, I'm thinking.
Okay, Neora, you get to add.
Just quick. I was thinking about the egocentrism also, and remember me, and sometimes remember me like it's just kind of like an affirmation of a connection we had. Don't forget, I don't know, there's something very personal about it, that there was a space of you and me, and don't forget that. And I don't know, connections are some of the most important things in life. So that's kind of because the egocentrism, I kind of wanted to see it a different way, because I guess part of me is biased. I want to see the good side of God. So I'm like, well, what's a good way to see it?
Sure. I think we all search for that. I think that's why the theology of why do bad things happen to good people is such a strong one and such a hard question, because we want to see the good in God. And so when we see these aspects of God that are maybe not bad, but are challenging, that's a very difficult part of theology to have to contend with. Rebecca.
I have a feeling that they're in a bad spot. That's not the.
Great.
I think that's mostly where I was hanging with it as well. I mean, I think, first of all, it's always wonderful when like a phrase that you don't expect will generate so much conversation. That's always cool. And I think, Rebecca, I think I'm mostly aligned with your sense of that, right? That this is, it's a reminder, right? And we have like mezuzah was referenced and all that kind of thing. Karen, what you're talking about in terms of how you remember your dogs, right? That this is a way that we remember and stay in integrity with a relationship. I'm thinking about, right, when you a spectrum of healthy and unhealthy relationships, right? Like there's one unhealthy form of relationship that's codependency, right? Which is like your well-being is totally tied up with the well-being of another person, right? That's codependency. And being completely independent means you're trying to have no relationships whatsoever, right? You're just trying to go it all on your own. Healthy relationships are interdependent, right? That you have your individuality, right? I still act as an independent person in the world, and I'm still connected to the people I care about and who care about me. And like through that lens, I see this as like God trying to make a move towards interdependency, right? And like I can use this as a segue into like some of the other where some of the Mefarshim go in terms of understanding. There's an interesting connection with something that happens like later on in Jeremiah, where like the Tzintzeret is actually like held up and said like, see, remember this, right? Remember this time that we had in the desert, that God and the people of Israel, and we talk about Sinai as a marriage, right? That they're sort of they're in their like, are they engaged? I guess they're engaged right now. They're engaged and they're moving towards the wedding, right? So they're trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to make this relationship last long term? And God says, yeah, like here's an indication of how I'm helping take care of you, and like I need you and you need me. And I guess that's kind of how I see this.
Do you want to talk about the Tzintzeret piece? Because now we've mentioned it, but not explained why you're so excited about it.
So excited about it. In case you were doubting how dorky your beloved Temple Beth Am rabbis are.
Just rabbi for this one, but
excuse me, Rabbi Schatz. I was prepping for our class last night, doing my usual linguistic due diligence, as I am wont to do. And I looked up the word Tzintzeret, and it only appears once in the entire Tanakh, which, Renee, is why I'm particularly like taken by your comment of, no, this is like actually a word that's in normative modern Hebrew usage, which is so fascinating. So I texted Rabbi Schatz, and Rabbi Schatz, what did you say?
Hapax legomenon.
Yes, which is a wonderful Latin term for a word that only appears once in the whole Tanakh. You used plenty of exclamation points too when you texted back. So I was not the only person, unless you were just...
Well, hapax legomenon I think is so interesting, because for the same reason that the Sulam in the Jacob story is a hapax legomenon, but now similar to how Renee knows that Tzintzeret is a jug, that we take kind of the context around the word and we then put it to a definition, even though we don't actually know that a sulam is a ladder, and we don't actually know that a Tzintzeret is a jug, but because we've now created kind of modern terminology around the context of
created a container
the
for
word.
What our understanding might be.
Oh, the container, very good, to lead us to the definition. That was harder for a ladder, but anyway, that's how we then
climb the challenges that we might face in understanding what these verses are telling us. No.
Okay.
No, but A, it was exciting, and B, there are a couple of different comments, like trying to understand, like, okay, what is this Tzintzeret, and how do we figure out what it is? Yeah, Renee, you have your hand up. Tell us about Tzintzeret. Is that the plural for a Tzintzeret? Tzintzeret?
Sure. No, it's just interesting to me. I do the Daf Shvu'i, and I'm in the part of the Daf Shvu'i where they're talking about damages that are done by vessels or containers. And interestingly enough, they don't use the word Tzintzeret in that.
Right.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I agree. I haven't seen it used either, and it's other than knowing using it on a daily basis, just because I'm in the kitchen so much.
I wonder. This is my imaginary drash on what Eliezer ben Yehuda might have been thinking when he created modern Hebrew. Like, what if, when he was like coming up with what modern Hebrew words might there be for like jars and containers, he thought to himself, oh, the Tzin is something that was supposed to last for generations, and now I'm bringing Hebrew back, so I'm going to reintroduce that word here so that we can have like a symbolic gesture back to what that meant in the context of the Torah. That is my imaginary drash on what Eliezer ben Yehuda might have been thinking 130 years ago.
It's also a fun sounding word. It is
also a fun sounding word.
Kufsa. I mean, kufsa is kind of boring, but Tzin has a nice ring to it.
Absolutely. Rebecca, were you waving? Was that an Eliezer ben Yehuda? Yeah. Oh, you're muted.
I just looked it up as well because I know for jam it's Tzin, it's riba, and it's the word for a jar. But it says that it's not ben Yehuda. It was some other guy, Reuven el-Kalai.
Al-Kalai.
Yeah. So
but that he brought it back, that he like sort of revived it.
Right.
So it was a word that had like lain dormant, that really wasn't used, but then was.
He even made a verb out of it, tzin, which means to put in a jar.
Yeah.
I've never seen that.
That's so cool.
I will tell a very sweet story about Al-Kalai because you are all members of Temple Beth Am. Baruch Link, when learning poetry with him, he used to never allow you to just say that you didn't know a word or that you had looked it up in a dictionary but you couldn't find it. He would always say,
Al-Kalai, Al-Kalai, Al-Kalai.
That's exactly right.
When Sarah and I were going through our books, like, what are we going to keep from grad school? What are we not going to keep from grad school? Because of our beloved Dr. Link, even though we don't really use our Al-Kalai for English dictionary all that often. We could not bear ourselves to get rid of it because.
What is that word?
It's the name of the person who created the dictionary, and per Rebecca's comment, also played a major role in terms of like what the language of modern Hebrew is, right? You know it's a good idea to have a dictionary if you are someone who has played a role in the creation of the language, right? So that's generally a good resource to be going to. Rabbi Schatz, do you want to talk about Tzin some more? I could talk about Tzin for a long time, but I don't know if there's a piece that you want to make sure to share. I also have my Chassidut piece that I'm very excited about. But
what's your Chassidut piece about?
Tzin.
Okay, so my great, obviously. So the pieces that the part, I guess I would say that I found most interesting was the idea of not only having this jar, but also having it be something that was there forever, which is why I really liked Karen's interpretation of it being similar to what some people do with ashes, to keep them in some kind of urn. And I was just very taken by this idea because, as some of you have mentioned, they were complaining in the field about not having, or not the field, the desert, not having, if it was a field, it would have been easier, not have enough to eat. And then all of a sudden they had the manna, but the idea of the manna was kind of to take them from a place of nothingness to a place of plenty, a place of abundance. And so why keep the manna around? That was my kushia. Like what's the reason to keep the manna around, and to have it be something that is symbolic of a harder time as opposed to a time that was easier. So interestingly, I found a few rabbis who are talking about that this week, which was, maybe rabbis always talk about it and I just had never noticed it, but I was surprised that they were talking about it this week.
There's a Tzin energy in the air. Everybody's feeling the Tzin this year.
Yeah, sure. So one of the pieces that I found was from a midrash, from Midrash Tanhuma, and I'm just going to read it and then I'll explain it. Was this a piece that you brought, Rabbi Shapiro? No? Okay, great. I just don't want to step on your toes. Okay, so it says, and Moses said unto Aaron, take a jar and put an omer. Actually, let me share my screen. I know some of you appreciate that, so hold on one second. We can read it together. Okay. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, it's Midrash Tanhuma, and it's for Beshalach, that's this week's Parasha, 21:1. And it says, and Moses said unto Aaron, take a jar and put an omer full of manna therein. I would not know of what substance the jar was fashioned, whether of silver or of gold or of iron or of lead, except for the fact that Scripture says tzinsenet, a word that suggests something that keeps a thing cooler than anything else. Jastrow tells us that tzinsenet is in the text because it glistened more than anything. Jastrow is another dictionary author. Would you say author? I guess. And that could only be a clay vessel. And put an omer full of manna therein, right? So now we're just talking about what it was made of. And then this omer, this bunch of manna would go in, or maybe 2 liters worth of manna would go inside it. Rabbi Eliezer held it was stored there for future generations. Well, Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that it was put there for the Messianic era, for the time about which the prophet Jeremiah said to Israel, "Why do you not devote yourself to the Torah?" And they replied, "If we do, how shall we obtain our sustenance?" Then they brought forth the jar of manna and said, "O generation, see the word of the Lord. Have I been a wilderness unto Israel, or a land of thick darkness? Wherefore say my people, we roam at large, we will come no more unto thee. Your fathers occupied themselves with the law, and see how they were fed. Concern yourselves with the law, and I shall feed you from this jar." Very, very interesting, right? Again, this idea that manna was supposed to be something that was given to the people as a way of gaining nutrition when they couldn't find it anywhere else. And yet here it's being seen as some kind of like prize almost, right? As like a great thing to be able to obtain. This is one of the 3 things that Elijah will restore to Israel in the future: the jar of manna, the bottle of anointing oil, and the bottle of sprinkling water. These are things used in the temple. Others add Aaron's rod with its ripe almonds and blossoms. Okay. So, Rabbi Shapiro, yes. You're muted. Yeah.
Slight edit on that, which is they might have been used in the temple, but when you talk about bottle of anointing oil, I think that's a reference to Mashiach, right? Because Mashiach is the anointed one in the sense of Elijah coming, right? I think it's an indication, because I saw a similar but
those things are used, like they are used for Mashiach later on because they were used in the temple. It was my understanding.
Great, but then like the connotation when Elijah comes, like it's a harbinger.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it.
It's like a harbinger of the Messianic times. That like when Elijah comes, this tzinsenet is like a critical piece of the Messianic puzzle. Which again, for something that I've known about for approximately like 72 hours. Like I've known about anointing oil for a while, but the tzinsenet is new. I'm just trying to say
Yeah, that's clear. So for me, this midrash is particularly interesting because of the way that we actually understand manna as something that needs to be held onto, that even if it was seen as like I keep thinking of, like the army food, right? Like it would never be the kind of meal that you would go to a fancy restaurant to receive, but it keeps you sustained. It keeps you with nutrition. And when you, to imagine that being the kind of sustenance that you try to hold on to, whether it's for memory or because that's being given to you as some kind of reward, that's just a very different way of understanding manna, and holding on to that, especially in the time of Mashiach, just seems really bizarre. But the part of it that I really like that comes kind of from my brain based on the Midrash, doesn't directly come from the Midrash, but is this idea that we need to hold on to things that aren't just good. We need to hold on to those memories. That's why I think in Judaism we have so many touch points of memory, because it's not just about the good. Oh, sorry, am I stealing something from you? Anyway, that's okay. That we're not just holding on to memories that have made us feel good or taken us through good times, but that we're also holding on to memories. Sorry, I'm stealing stuff from Matt Shapiro and I feel really bad.
No, exactly the opposite. The text that I'm going to bring indicates something exactly the opposite. And again, I'm coming at this from a very different place, which is it's a fun day.
Okay, then quiet and I'll finish. Okay, so the idea that those memories also help you grow, and that holding on to them is actually more important than just letting them be. Once it's over, letting it stay behind. But that if you hold on to it, it can help you get to that next stage, which might be better and more beautiful. But you needed those pieces, those shattered moments, that mana, as opposed to, the very gourmet dinner, to be held in your midst. Yeah, Bonnie.
So if it's supposed to be very important to remember as a sign, why have you just heard of it just now? Where is it else found in anything through the centuries? Are there, is it in some of those other things, not just the word Tzintzeret, but the concept of the storing of the manna as a sign for all of us to remember?
100%. Yeah, I agree. I don't know is the answer. I think that the idea of manna is obviously one that most of us have heard of and have thought of. And so possibly, if I wanted to drush on that, we are the tzintzenot, right? Like, we're the ways in which we carry that manna forward. Watching Rabbi Shapiro's reaction.
Now you're stepping on my toes here.
Okay, then go ahead. You take it.
No, I mean, it's like you're good. It's all good.
No, that was it. That good.
You're droshing all over the place. What I will say is it's interesting to me that as you're riffing, you're landing on the idea of manna as a sign of something that's like not like we're carrying that memory with us to remind us of a time that wasn't great. Certainly traditionally, even though like it seems at odds with the shot of this parak, the time in the desert was supposed to be like when Bnei Israel were like at their holiest, at their closest with God, like the best of times. Like, have you read chapter 16? But that's often how it's understood. And still, I would say the manna is a life-giving substance that was offered to us, right? That's amazing, right? And Sarah and I were talking about this a little last night, and she was reflecting on this as an interesting construct in terms of what we're going through right now, in terms of having enough, right? The sense of like, we might not have everything, but those of us who are blessed to have it, like we have enough, and like that can sustain us. And that's a really interesting idea. Thank you, Sarah. But
that goes back to your toilet paper thing, to be, silly about it. No, but seriously.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And how are we working to calibrate a sense of enoughness, right? And that there's actually a really profound and important spiritual lesson in that.
Yeah.
Going to now, Rabbi Schatz, what you were saying about each of us being the Tzintzenet. Rabbi Schatz, I'm doing this for you because whenever I bring long Hasidic stuff, you look very confused because you are a visual learner. So I made sure that the long text that I'm going to share was written out, so you can roll your eyes at it for different reasons.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a teaching of the Moreh 9. We could do like a whole Hasidic jam on this. Credit where it's due. I did not translate this. I found this on Safari. Thank you to the person who. I
will just say, because I know Rabbi Shapiro very well. I saw this Moreh 9. I started reading the first 3 sentences, and I was like, nah, he can bring it. So I'm really glad that you're teaching it.
You are a thoughtful teaching partner. Thank you for that. It's wonderful to be known. There's a lot here, and there's no way like in 11 minutes we're gonna buzz through this and get every piece of it. Not even close. But there's an interesting idea that I'll try to sort of like pull out a bit. To explore for a little bit before we wrap up. So again, there's this sense that just what I was referring to, that Bnei Israel, when the people of Israel, they were going through the time in the desert, it was an extremely holy time for them. This was like unadulterated, spiritual ultimate. There's no mediation between Bnei Israel and the experience of God, right? They could receive the life force without any God. They can get it directly from God. And this is now going to take us, there's much more there, but that's going to just come into counterpoint for where I'm going to focus in a bit more, which is, so Rabbi Schatz, you and the Maori Nine, the Chernobyl Rebbe, you guys are operating on the same wavelength. We continue to see that you are so much more Hasidic than we ever knew you were. This idea that each one of us, see, here, right here, his life force is garbed in a vessel, right? That we are each walking around and have a life force within us, and God has tzimtzumified, right? I'm intentionally using the Hebrew and then making it right, because tzimtzum has rich connotations in this type of literature, that God has contracted God's self enough for creation to exist. God has contracted God's self enough. And so therefore, when God says to Moses, take a tzintzit and put some manna in it, that's because, right, that the meaning of it is that that the manna is the life force, which is where I'm pushing back on your first drash, Rabbi Schatz, right? That the manna isn't like the hearkening back to the oi of the experience, that the manna is the hearkening back to, this is like the essential life force that sustains us. And even though we do not have the ultimate spiritual experience that the Israelites had in the desert of not needing any barrier between them or God, or not having any barrier between them and God, whatever, even though we have this tzintzit, this like container, we still have the manna within us, right? We still have that life force within us. And so then there's the challenge of accessing that. I'll layer in one more piece of a very complex text that we don't have nearly enough time to explore, but just it's very interesting to me as well that he has like sort of a, not like quite like halakha l'ma'aseh, like very practical thing to do, but he does bring it out in terms of a way in which we can conceive of this a little bit today. Folks know, right, this Parasha and Beshalach, we also have the Song of the Sea, Az Yashir, which is a part of our everyday liturgy. And so what the Maori Nine reflects back is that when we say that with kavanah, when we say that with intention, there's an idea in Jewish mysticism, right, as above, so below, right, that when we do things here on earth, that there's a corresponding action up, literally up in heaven, in that construct. When we say the Az Yashir with intention, that activates something up above, and we in turn sort of like get infused with life force down below, right, down here. So to make that a little more practical and to like try to translate and pull that apart a little bit more, I really like this idea, this construct that Rabbi Schatz got to without the Maori Nine all by herself. This idea that we are each a vessel, we each have that life force within us, and there are things that we can do and like need to do to be able to access that, and that when we do those things, and this goes back to the idea of building relationship. When we pray with kavanah, when we act with kavanah, we impact God, and then that creating that activation within God in turn activates the life force within us, which brings us back to the wonderful time that we used to have. So there's a lot to go into there, but I got very excited seeing it. Rabbi Schatz knew I would get excited seeing it. Thank you, Rabbi Schatz. To share it with you guys.
This isn't directly connected, but it made me think of this other piece that I found, again, from a rabbi who was speaking about this Shabbos and posted about it. And he wrote, manna, therefore, was a meal with a message. It was not just a way of feeding the people, but a means to teach them. It trained them in trust that the manna would arrive every day, in contentment with what they had and not seeking more, in planning ahead for Shabbat and respecting the sanctity of Shabbat. These were religious lessons, not just for that time, but for all time. That is why a jar of manna was collected and placed in the Ark of the Covenant alongside the Ten Commandments, to be a reminder for all future generations of those ideas. It's really interesting. Any thoughts or comments on this? Yeah, Renee.
I love the way all your classes are kind of combining together with the Srugim and the observant and non-observant, and preparing for Shabbat ahead of time and not cooking on Shabbat. And maybe today's modern man is cholent.
Interesting. Yeah. Huh.
Although, do you eat cholent every day? I was just giving Rabbi.
We only eat cholent on Shabbat, and we prepare it ahead of time in our crock pot, and we eat it on Shabbat. It's the one I mentioned it yesterday. It's the one meal that I don't have to think about. What am I going to make today? Because we always eat cholent on Shabbat.
Rabbi Schatz, do you hear that? You only eat cholent on Shabbat.
I did. I made it for Shabbat. Thank you.
Rabbi Schatz earlier this week was talking about making cholent like on a Tuesday, and I was giving her a very hard time.
I just had the ingredients and had the time. Anyway, okay,
Rabbi
Bonnie.
Schatz, how did it turn out?
Did it taste like coriander honey wafers?
I haven't tasted it. Okay, Bonnie.
So to me, the take home from all of this is that the actual Senate was not lost, but that each of us are now the vessel for knowing that God is there, and God's support allows us to have enough each day. And certainly this past year, as we've mentioned, shows that up more than usual, in having to do with what we have, and that's the reminder of the manna that was sent those long years ago.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a great connection to especially what we're living through right now. Yeah.
I'll add in there, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to be walking through the wilderness and to not be able to fill up as much as you can with your provision, so that you know you can make it through the week, and you need to take it one day at a time. It's really difficult right now. I think there's that, eternal challenge coming from a slightly different direction, but we know this, right? Izahu Ashir Asameach Bechelko, right? Who is rich, the person who's happy with what they have. That is an eternal spiritual challenge, right? It was back then and it is now. And I think I see those as at least there's some Venn diagram there, right? The sense that, okay, if I have enough for today, that's enough. That's difficult.
When we were growing up, and I don't know if this comes out of a midrash or I'm not sure where this comes from, but we were growing up when we learned about manna. We learned that the manna tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like, and there's something powerful about that also, that when you think about enoughness, or you think about being having to be satisfied with that which you have in your house. I just keep thinking about the way that at least I think about groceries these days is so different than I used to, right? And making do with what I have in my house, and creating new recipes and finding use for new ingredients I never would have thought of before, because I'm not just rushing out of my house to go to a grocery store. And so the idea that manna could be this kind of magical potion that teaches us to understand that blessing of having enough, but also the creativity of figuring out what to do with it, to see it as a blessing, not just as, oh, I have another can of beans, I should order something on Postmates, right? No, figure out what to do with the ingredients that you have, with the manna that's being given to you. Nancy. Sorry. No, go ahead. And then Nancy can go.
I was just going to say, I think it cultivates a different kind of awareness, right? It just cultivates a different kind of awareness of food and gratitude, right? If I actually remember very, very clearly, there was a moment at the beginning of this when we really didn't know, right? We really didn't know if the food supply chain was going to hold for a couple of days. Some of us were more aware of that than others, right, Rabbi Schatz? And there was a moment, I think the first or second week of this, when we had mac and cheese the night before, and I put out mac and cheese for the boys for lunch. And they were like, we don't want mac and cheese. We don't want mac and cheese. And I said to them, you need to eat this. This is what we have. And I said to them, and it was like a really emotional moment. I said to them, I promise you we will always have enough food, but I don't know what the next couple of weeks are going to look like in terms of being able to pick what you eat. It was the first time in my life I've ever said that to my kids, which I will also own, like, come from a place of tremendous privilege. I know that differently now than I'd ever known it in my entire life.
Mm-hmm. Right. And all that complaining, right? Like the complaining that the Israelites do, and then receiving the manna and having kind of that talk of like, this is what you get. And
this is what you get.
Yeah.
But you have it. And can we be grateful that we have this?
Right. Yeah, Nancy.
Okay. So you kind of talked just now about where I was going to come from, which is that we can have this discussion because just like you say, if you have to have the same thing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 nights in a row, at least it's filling your stomach, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard, and maybe because of last night too.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say, yeah, that's great. Be happy with what you have when you don't have enough. And it's, I think, ordering from the grocery store and getting, half of the order kind of, right, brings you more awareness, but you still can say, well, I'll be happy with what I have.
Absolutely.
100%.
There is still the inequities and disparities in terms of how so many of our systems are set up are horrifying.
Yeah, and that's about food, or that's about the vaccine, or that's about housing, or that's about, that's a real downer, but it's
true.
Right? But it's true. And just, listening to the conversation, I think you're right. I think it gives us a better perspective of what it's like. But, I don't know, bringing it back to the, God and the manna and all of that, it's hard to say for people who really don't have enough.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say, I think 2 more things on that. One of which is my hope that the fact that I had that moment with my kids, which is on so much of a lower level than what millions and millions of people experience each and every single day, at least brings a little more awareness, hopefully a lot more awareness to me in terms of how I operate within food systems in my life, in terms of how then that activates me to behave and call awareness to things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing I would say, to your point, Nancy, about how do we do when there is enough, there actually is enough. There's more than enough food in the world.
Right.
There are enough raw calories for people to have all they need and more. But because of how systems are set up, they don't get them.
Absolutely.
And, Rabbi Schatz set up the food pantry at Beth, and we try to work with organizations that help, people where we can. But that is a call for all of us, right? Maybe that's what the Mishmeret needs to be. Maybe that's what this is really about. The reminder that we should each have enough. There's enough for all of us to have enough. But the question is, how do we make sure that we're setting things up so that people can have enough? And like there was that verse about how some of the Israelites would run out and grab a bunch and some people just didn't, right? How do we get to a place where we can discipline ourselves and continue to do that work to have that kind of equality? Like that's one of the things that maybe this is calling us to do.
Yeah. I'll say one thing and then Rabbi Shapiro, you can close if you'd like. I think that it's interesting how this conversation has gone. I don't think this would have been my conclusion had we taken it a different direction, but it's interesting how when thinking about all the things that Nancy just mentioned, right? The vaccine, food, toilet paper, all these things, Rabbi Shapiro alluded to a moment where he and I went to, and it's a funny story, but brings actually a lot of poignancy to this. After Purim, we had extra materials because not everybody in the community came to Purim last year because it was the beginning of the pandemic, and we just ended up with more stuff than we needed. So we went back to what?
And I completely misunderstood what it meant to try to make your own
Yes, correct.
Hand sanitizer.
Right, hand sanitizer. Right. He also had the wrong supplies. I wasn't going to call you out on that, but okay. So we went back to Ralph's to return the supplies, and this was right at the beginning of things, the beginning of March. And he said to me, Rebecca, can you stand in line while I go to get a few groceries, because there's going to be a huge line for us to return this stuff. And I looked at him and I was like, you're nuts. There's not huge lines. Like, it's 1 p.m. on a Thursday. Like, how could we possibly stand in the line? And we got to Ralph's and there was a very long line. And he asked me if I needed groceries. And I was like, no, I'm totally fine. And we too often forget things that are going to help us with whatever comes next. And I hope that I remember that. And I hope that I keep the things that were important to me during this time in mind when we move out of this time. And I hope that I recognize privilege more in order to help others. And I hope that we're able to really just have learned things from this period of time that we're in to be able to do something about them when we're out of it. So that for me is the way that I'm thinking about carrying that mana this Shabbat and all forward. Shapiro.
Renee, you have a quick thought before I wrap it up?
Yes, a quick thought. This week we also commemorated International Holocaust Day.
Yeah.
And all of this talk that you guys are talking about now with food and whatnot, it reminds me very much growing up in a Holocaust home of the whole mentality for them, for many Holocaust survivors, both my family and people that I talk to now making phone calls, that this is a really scary time for them, not only because of the time now, but it brings back those memories. And, I know for many of them, having pantries and that concern and worry about, are we going to have enough food? Or like you were saying with the mac and cheese, I mean, my parents were happy to eat whatever they could eat, even if it was a potato peel.
Right.
So it just reminded me of that. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for bringing that.
I appreciate that. I mean, that historical resonance from not very long ago is still quite real. Not to just sort of slap a happy face over that, right? But my hope in turn is that we can remember all the times that we have been sustained, because those are real too. Right. And that hopefully, everyone on this Zoom now and everyone listening to this does have the sustenance that they need. And if you don't, we're here to help you. And I hope people know that too, because we are blessed to have enough resources that we can provide for those in our community who are in need. And we are always working to make sure that we can do that. And I guess to tie it back in a slightly different direction, I really do love that text from the Moreh Naim and doing the work, yes, on the physical level, but also on the spiritual level as well, to try to look within ourselves and look within our community, to trust and have faith and look within to see the resources that we each do have within us to keep putting one foot in front of the other as we walk this journey. And I trust that we each have that, and I hope you do too.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.